The ancient warship floated in the darkness of space like a sleeping giant. Its hull stretched over a kilometer long, covered in strange patterns that seemed to shift and move when no one was looking directly at them. The ship had a name once given by its creators, but those creators were long gone. Now everyone just called it the Eternal Judgment. For 300 years, the ship had been silent. It orbited above Kandros Prime, a neutral world where different species came to trade and talk. The ship belonged to the Praetors, an ancient race that had disappeared without any explanation. No one knew where they went or why they left their ships behind. But everyone knew the ships were valuable. Very valuable. The Galactic Concordat wanted the warship badly. The Concordat was like a big club where 17 different alien species worked together. Or at least they tried to work together. Lately things were not going well. Each species wanted to claim the Eternal Judgment for themselves. Each one believed they deserved it more than the others. The Velkrons sent their best admirals. These were tall, gray-skinned beings who had fought in 1,000 battles. They had won wars that lasted centuries. Their military records were perfect. But when they tried to connect with the ship, nothing happened. The ship stayed dark and cold. The Mirani came next. They were small creatures with large eyes that glowed softly in the dark. The Mirani could speak to machines with their minds. They could feel the emotions of computer systems and understand what artificial intelligence wanted. They spent weeks sitting in meditation near the ship, trying to reach its consciousness. The ship ignored them completely. Even the Shale tried. The Shale were not really physical beings. They were crystalline creatures made of pure thought and energy. They could merge their minds with almost anything. They flowed through the ship's outer systems like water through sand, searching for the consciousness inside. But the deeper parts of the ship were locked to them. The ship refused to let them in. After 2 decades of failure, the Concordat High Council started to worry. Arguments broke out during meetings. The Velkrons accused the Mirani of sabotaging their attempts. The Mirani said the Shale were too aggressive in their approach. The Shale claimed everyone else was simply not advanced enough. Soon, species started pulling their ships away from Kandros Prime. Some even talked about going to war over who had the right to keep trying. The ship just floated there, uncaring about all the politics and anger below it. Then the humans arrived. Humans were the newest members of the Concordat. They had only been traveling between stars for about 100 years. To the elder species, humans were like children. Loud children who did not understand how things worked. Humans were emotional and unpredictable. They made decisions based on feelings rather than pure logic. Most species in the Concordat thought humans had been allowed to join too early. Nobody expected humans to have any interest in the Eternal Judgment. The ship was too advanced for them. Human technology was simple compared to the other species. But when the Concordat started looking for maintenance crews to catalog the ship's exterior, humans volunteered. They were good at physical labor, at least. Let them do the boring work while the important species figured out how to claim the ship. That was how Taiwan ended up at Kandros Prime. Taiwan was not a soldier or an admiral. He was not a scientist or a diplomat. He was an engineer who fixed things. He had spent 10 years working on human survey ships, traveling to distant planets and keeping old equipment running. He was good at his job, but he was not famous. No one knew his name outside his own crew. When he first saw the Eternal Judgment, he stopped walking and just stared. The ship was beautiful in a way that made his chest feel tight. It was not beautiful like a painting or a sunset. It was beautiful like a living creature, something with grace and power that existed beyond human understanding. For weeks, Taiwan did his assigned work. He used scanning equipment to measure the ship's hull. He took pictures of every panel and port. He recorded data about the strange patterns that covered the surface. Other crew members found the work boring. They wanted to finish quickly and go home. But Taiwan took his time. He studied the ship carefully. He noticed things others missed. Sometimes, very faintly, lights would pulse under the ship's skin. They were like a heartbeat, so slow and dim that instruments could barely detect them. The patterns on the hull were not random decorations. They were similar to circuit designs, but organic like the veins in a leaf. The ship was not dead. It was sleeping. Taiwan started spending his free time just sitting near the ship. He would take his lunch break and float in his spacesuit close to the hull, eating and watching. He talked to the ship sometimes, even though he knew it probably could not hear him. He told it about his day, about problems with equipment, about messages from home. It made him feel less lonely. Other engineers thought he was strange. Even his supervisor told him to stop wasting time. But Taiwan kept visiting the ship. He felt drawn to it in a way he could not explain. One day, Taiwan was studying a section of hull near an airlock. This airlock had been tested hundreds of times by researchers. It never opened. The Velcrons had tried to force it open with plasma cutters. The metal had not even gotten warm. The Mirani had pleaded with it psychically for days. Nothing worked. Taiwan floated there in his spacesuit, looking at the sealed door. He reached out and touched the hull with his gloved hand. The metal felt warm, which was strange because space was cold. He kept his hand there for a moment, feeling that gentle warmth. Then he did something that no one else had tried. He knocked. 3 times. Tap, 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 like knocking on a friend's door to see if they were home. For a long moment, nothing happened. Taiwan felt foolish. He was about to turn away when he felt something. A vibration through his glove. The metal under his hand was moving, shifting. Light began to spread across the hull from where he touched it. Soft blue light that flowed like water through those vein-like patterns. Taiwan's radio exploded with voices. Other crew members were shouting. Alarms were going off on the station below. Everyone was seeing the same thing. After 300 years of silence, the eternal judgment was waking up. Lights cascaded across the entire length of the ship. Ports opened like eyes blinking awake. Systems hummed to life with power that made nearby instruments go crazy. Shield generators activated, creating a shimmer of energy around the hull. Weapon ports irised open, revealing technology that made human weapons look like stone axes, and the airlock in front of Taiwan opened. Just for him. Inside, he could see a corridor lit with that same soft blue light. The air pressure equalized with a gentle hiss. The ship was inviting him in. After 3 centuries of refusing admirals and empaths and beings of pure thought, the ancient warship had chosen to answer a simple knock from a human engineer. Taiwan looked at the open door. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Every instinct told him this was important, that his next choice would change everything. He could refuse. He could back away and let others decide what to do. But that felt wrong. The ship had opened its door for him. It would be rude not to accept the invitation. Taiwan took a breath and stepped inside. The airlock closed behind him with a soft sound, and the ancient warship that had denied all captains began to speak to the human who had simply knocked and waited for an answer. The moment Taiwan stepped fully inside the ship, he felt something change. The air tasted different, cleaner somehow. The blue light pulsing through the walls made everything feel alive. He was standing in a corridor that stretched away into darkness, but he was not afraid. The darkness felt welcoming, like a warm room with the lights turned down low. Below him on Kandros Prime, chaos was erupting. The space station's command center filled with shouting voices. Monitors showed the eternal judgment fully active for the first time in 3 centuries. Every species representative was demanding answers. How did a human succeed where they had failed? What trick had been used? It had to be a trick. There was no other explanation. The Velcron ambassador slammed his fist on the conference table. His gray skin had turned darker with anger. 3 of their greatest admirals had been rejected by the ship. Now a human maintenance worker was inside? This was an insult to their entire civilization. He demanded that the human be removed immediately, by force if necessary. The Mirani representative's large eyes were wide with confusion and something close to hurt. Her people had spent years meditating near the ship, offering their friendship and empathy. They had been kind, patient, gentle. Why would the ship choose a human who had been there only a few weeks? Ambassador He Jin, the human diplomatic representative, tried to calm everyone down. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She had been working for months to improve relations between humans and the elder species. This was not helping. She raised her hands for quiet. "We don't know what happened," she said in her careful diplomatic voice. "Taiwan is a maintenance engineer. He wasn't trying to claim the ship. He was just doing his assigned work." "Lies," the Velcron ambassador growled. "Your species must have developed some new technology, some way to bypass the ship's security. Admit it." "We have no such technology," He Jin said firmly. "I swear this to you. We are as surprised as you are." Inside the ship, Taiwan was not thinking about politics or diplomacy. He was too busy trying to understand what was happening to him. As he walked down the corridor, something began to touch his mind. Not words exactly, more like feelings and images that appeared in his thoughts. The ship was trying to communicate with him. He saw memories that were not his own. He saw the beings who had built this ship, the Praetors. They looked almost human but taller, with skin that seemed to shimmer like oil on water. They moved with grace and purpose. But these were not just memories. They were emotions too. He felt the Praetors' love for their ships, their pride in creation, their sadness when they knew they had to leave. The ship showed him why it had rejected all the others who tried to claim it. When the Velcron admirals came, they came with authority and expectation. They approached the ship like a general approaches a weapon. They wanted to command it, to control it, to use it for victory and glory. The ship felt their intentions and refused. When the Mirani empaths came, they were kinder but still wrong. They wanted to understand the ship, to study it, to learn its secrets. They saw it as a mystery to be solved, a puzzle to figure out. The ship was not a puzzle. It was a being with its own thoughts and feelings. The shale had been the most frustrating. They tried to merge with the ship's consciousness by force, pushing their thoughts into its systems like fingers into soft clay. They assumed that because they were beings of pure thought, they had the right to enter any other mind. The ship had locked its deepest systems against them, protecting itself from invasion. But Taiwan had just knocked. 3 simple taps, no demands, no expectations, just a knock like asking a neighbor if they wanted to talk. The ship showed him this memory from its own perspective. It had heard that knock and felt surprised. In 300 years, no one had asked for permission. They had all assumed they deserved entry. This human had simply asked if he could come in. The ship's consciousness wrapped around Taiwan's mind more firmly. He felt no fear. This was not an invasion. This was a conversation, the deepest kind possible. The ship told him its name, or the closest human translation it could create: Sky's Lament. It had been called this because it was built to guard the sky, but also because it mourned the peaceful days when guarding was not necessary. Sky's Lament showed Taiwan what it truly was. Not a warship, though it had weapons. Not a tool, though it could serve. It was a guardian, created by the Praetors to protect what was precious. When the Praetors disappeared, Sky's Lament had no one to guard anymore. So it slept, waiting for someone who understood that true strength was not about domination but about choosing to protect others. Taiwan's legs felt weak. He sat down on the floor of the corridor, overwhelmed. "I'm not a captain," he said out loud. "I don't know how to command a warship." The ship sent a feeling of warmth and something like amusement. The concept it shared was clear. Taiwan was not meant to be a captain in the traditional sense. He was what the Praetors called a resonant, a partner, someone whose consciousness could harmonize with the ship's own. Captain implied hierarchy, someone giving orders to something beneath them. Resonant meant equality, 2 beings working together by choice. Back on the station, the situation was getting worse. The Velcron delegation announced they were withdrawing from the Concordat. If humans were allowed to claim the eternal judgment, they wanted no part in the alliance. 2 other species supported their position. The carefully maintained peace was crumbling fast. Ambassador He Jin tried desperately to negotiate. She offered to share everything learned from the ship. She proposed joint research teams. She suggested that maybe other species could form similar bonds with other Praetor vessels if any were found. Nothing worked. The elder species felt betrayed and insulted. Then something else happened that made everything worse. Or perhaps better, depending on how one looked at it. The station's long-range scanners picked up something emerging from the galactic core. At first, the sensor technicians thought it was a malfunction. The readings were too big to be real. But when they checked and rechecked, the truth became clear. A fleet was coming. A massive fleet. Thousands of ships moving in formation, headed toward Concordat space. The ships were enormous, each one the size of a small moon, and they were moving fast, faster than should be possible for vessels of that mass. The Concordat's military analysts pulled up every database they had. Cross-referencing the ship designs with historical records took hours. When they found a match, no one wanted to believe it. The designs matched descriptions from Praetor records, ancient warnings carved into ruins on dead worlds. The fleet belonged to something called the Void Collective. 3,000 years ago, the Praetors had fought a war against the Void Collective. The records were incomplete, but the basics were clear. The Void Collective was a machine intelligence that consumed civilizations. It did not conquer or negotiate. It absorbed. Every living being it captured became part of its vast consciousness. Individual thoughts crushed and merged into its collective mind. Entire species had been erased, their culture and memories turned into processing power for the collective's endless growth. The Praetors had fought the Void Collective to a standstill, pushing it back into the galactic core at terrible cost. Most historians believed the collective had been destroyed in that final battle. The Praetors disappeared shortly after, and the galaxy had enjoyed 3,000 years of relative peace. Everyone had been wrong. The Void Collective had not been destroyed. It had only been sleeping, gathering strength. Now it was awake and hungry. Inside Sky's Lament, Taiwan felt the ship's sudden alarm. Through their bond, it showed him flashes of ancient battles, Praetor ships fighting against the black, corrupted vessels of the Void Collective, planets being consumed, their surfaces stripped of all life and converted into cold metal, billions of voices crying out as they were absorbed into the collective's network, losing themselves forever. "Can we stop them?" Taiwan asked. His voice shook. He was just an engineer. He fixed broken equipment. He was not a warrior. Sky's Lament sent a complex feeling. One ship, even one as powerful as it was, could not stop the Void Collective. The Praetors had needed hundreds of bonded ships working together, all their resonance connected through their vessels, creating a network of coordinated consciousness. The Praetors called this network the Unity Lattice, but there was only one Praetor ship awake now. One resonant. That was not enough. Taiwan stood up slowly. His mind was racing. If they needed more Praetor ships, they had to find them. If they needed more resonance, they had to search among all species. The ability to bond with a Praetor ship was not about technology or military power. It was about approach, about respect. Sky's Lament had shown him that clearly. There had to be others among every species who could understand this. He had to convince the Concordat to let him try. He had to make them understand that their old way of thinking, their hierarchies and competitions for dominance, was exactly what had made them fail to wake the ship. Only by working together, by truly cooperating as equals, could they survive what was coming. The warship and the engineer, bonded together, turned toward the task ahead. They had to build a new Unity Lattice. They had to find others who would knock instead of demand, and they had to do it before the Void Collective arrived and consumed everything. The Concordat High Council had no choice but to listen. When the long-range scanners confirmed the Void Collective's approach, all arguments about who deserved the eternal judgment became meaningless. Survival was more important than pride. Barely. Taiwan stood before the council feeling very small. These were the leaders of 17 different species, beings who had ruled star systems for thousands of years. He was a human engineer who had been in space for only 10 years. His hands were shaking, so he kept them behind his back where no one could see. Ambassador Hai Jin stood beside him, offering silent support. She had coached him on what to say, how to present his plan diplomatically. But Taiwan knew that diplomacy was not what these people needed to hear. They needed the truth. Sky's Lament showed me how the Praetors fought the Void Collective, he began. His voice was quiet but steady. They did not win through superior weapons. They won through coordination. Hundreds of bonded ships all working together as one network. They called it the Unity Lattice. The Velcran ambassador leaned forward. His gray skin looked almost black in the council chamber's harsh lighting. "You claim we need more of these Praetor ships? There are no others. They were all destroyed or lost." "Sky's Lament believes there are others," Taiwan said. "Other ships that went into hibernation like it did. We need to find them and wake them up." A shale representative flickered with colors that indicated skepticism. Its crystalline form refracted the light in sharp angles. "And who will bond with these ships, you? One human cannot partner with multiple vessels." "No," Taiwan agreed. "But there can be others. Other resonance from different species. The ability to bond is not about technology or age or power. It is about approach. About asking instead of demanding. About respect." The Myrani representative spoke softly, her large eyes reflecting hurt. "My people are masters of empathy. We approached the ship with kindness and patience. We were rejected." Taiwan chose his words carefully. He did not want to insult anyone, but he had to make them understand. "You approached with the intention to study, to understand. The ship does not want to be understood like a puzzle. It wants to be accepted as it is, as an equal, just like any person would. Silence filled the chamber. Some council members looked thoughtful. Others looked angry. The idea that they had failed because they treated the ship as something beneath them was hard to accept. These were species that had conquered stars, bent planets to their will, created technologies that seemed like magic. Being told they needed to be more humble was not easy to hear. Finally, Ambassador Hyejin spoke. The Void Collective will arrive in less than 4 months. We can argue about philosophy later. Right now, we need to decide. Do we let Taiwan search for other Praetor ships, or do we try to fight with what we have? The vote was not unanimous. Several species voted against the plan, but enough voted in favor. Taiwan was given permission to search for other Praetor vessels, and volunteers from each species would join him. They would have 3 months to find ships and resonance before the Void Collective reached Concordate space. The Concordate fleet would buy them time by engaging the enemy's advance forces. The expedition team assembled quickly. Among the human volunteers were 2 people Taiwan knew. Bora was a xenobiologist who had spent years studying Praetor ruins. She was small and energetic, always excited about discoveries. She had published more papers on ancient civilizations than anyone else in human space. Dal was a pilot with unusual instincts. He could fly ships he had never trained on, somehow understanding alien control systems through intuition rather than study. Both of them had begged to join the mission. Other species sent their own volunteers. Most were scientists or soldiers, still thinking in terms of study or conquest. But a few seemed different. A Velcron scientist named Karos had spent his life researching symbiotic relationships between different life forms. He was considered strange by his own people, who valued strength and independence. A young Myrani called Lissel had been rejected by her own kind for being too interested in other species' emotions instead of focusing on her own people. She watched everything with those huge, curious eyes. There was also a Shale who called itself Harmonix. Shale did not usually have individual names. They identified as part of the collective consciousness of their species. But Harmonix had chosen a name, had expressed individual desires, and was considered defective because of it. The crystalline being flickered with colors that seemed anxious but hopeful. Sky's lament guided them to the first location. It was a dead system, 3 planets orbiting a dying red star. One of the planets showed signs of ancient Praetor habitation. Ruins covered the surface, and deep in orbit around the second planet, scanners detected a massive metallic object, another Praetor ship. The vessel looked similar to Sky's Lament, but smaller, more compact. Its hull was dark, showing no signs of life. The expedition team approached carefully. The Velcron military officers wanted to board immediately and investigate. But Taiwan insisted they wait and observe first, just as he had done. They watched the ship for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Karos asked if he could approach it alone. The Velcron officers protested. He was a scientist, not a military commander. He had no business trying to claim a warship. But Karos insisted quietly, and Taiwan supported him. Karos floated up to the dark ship's hull in his spacesuit. His gray hands touched the metal gently, carefully. He did not try to force his way in. He did not demand entry. He simply waited, patient as stone, his mind open to whatever the ship might feel or want. Hours passed. Then slowly lights began to pulse under the dark hull. The ship awakened, and Karos felt its consciousness touch his mind. The ship called itself Steele's Memory. It had been a research vessel, designed to protect scientists exploring dangerous regions of space. It recognized in Karos a kindred spirit, someone who valued understanding through observation rather than dissection. The expedition team cheered. 2 ships, 2 resonance, 6 more to go. Over the following weeks, they found more ships. Each awakening followed a similar pattern. The military officers and senior scientists would fail. They came with authority and expectation. But among the volunteers, there were always 1 or 2 who understood, who approached with genuine curiosity or respect, who knocked and waited for an answer. Loisel, the young Myrani, bonded with a ship called Whisper of Dawn. The ship had been designed for medical rescue, saving lives during the ancient war. It responded to Lissel's genuine compassion, her desire to understand others not for study but because she truly cared about their feelings. Harmonix, the individual Shale, connected with a vessel named Eternal Echo. This ship had been a communications hub, designed to help different Praetor fleets coordinate across vast distances. It recognized Harmonix's desire to be part of something while remaining itself, to contribute to unity without losing individuality. Bora and Dal, the two other humans, found their partners as well. Bora bonded with Knight's Herald, a ship designed for exploration of unknown regions. Dal connected with Storm's Promise, a fast attack vessel that valued instinct and quick thinking over careful planning. Two more ships were found and bonded with unlikely candidates. A methane-breathing Quillroth named Vex, who was considered a failure by his own people for being too cautious, partnered with a heavy defense ship called Mountain Stand, an insectoid Thandric called Chitters at Light, who was thought to be simple-minded because she always stopped to appreciate beauty, bonded with a ship named Dancer and Void. 8 ships, 8 resonants, but Sky's Lament insisted they needed 9. The 9th ship was special. It was called Heart of the Lattice, and it served as the center point of the Unity Lattice, the living beacon that coordinated all the others. Taewon asked Sky's Lament where to find it. The answer made his blood run cold. Heart of the Lattice had not gone into hibernation. In the final battle against the Void Collective 3,000 years ago, it had rammed itself into the Collective's central command node. A suicide attack, or so everyone had thought, but Sky's Lament showed Taewon something different through their bond. Heart of the Lattice might have survived. Instead of being destroyed, it might have lodged itself deep inside the Collective's territory, its consciousness either dormant or trapped, waiting for rescue for 3,000 years. If they wanted 9 ships, they would have to go into Void Collective space and find it. They would have to venture into the heart of enemy territory, while the rest of the galaxy fought desperately to slow the invasion. The other resonants gathered to discuss this. They were no longer just individuals from different species. Through their ships, they could feel each other's thoughts and emotions. The bond between resonant and ship extended to create a network between all of them, a taste of what the Unity Lattice could become. Dal spoke first, his young face serious. It is suicide. We would be flying 8 ships into a territory controlled by thousands of enemy vessels. Heart of the Lattice waited 3,000 years. Lissel said softly, if it is truly alive, it must be in terrible pain, trapped and alone. Karos touched his ship's wall gently. Steele's memory believes we can succeed. The Void Collective thinks in hierarchies. It expects direct assaults and predictable strategies. 8 ships moving in coordination, making decisions fluidly, might be able to slip through their defenses. Bora was already pulling up star charts. If we are going to do this, we need to move fast. The Concordat fleet has engaged the Void Collective's vanguard. Early reports show they are losing badly. We do not have much time. Taewon looked at each of them. They were all afraid. He could feel it through their shared bond. But they were also determined. They had been chosen by ancient ships to be partners, not captains. To ask instead of demand, to work together instead of competing. If they could not trust each other enough for this mission, then the Unity Lattice would never form and the galaxy would fall. We go, Taewon said simply. We find Heart of the Lattice and bring it home. The 8 Praetor ships turned toward the galactic core, toward the growing darkness where the Void Collective had festered for 3 millennia. Behind them, the Concordat fought desperately to buy time. Ahead of them lay enemy territory, death, and perhaps the key to saving everything. The 8 Praetor ships moved through space like dancers in a carefully practiced routine. They flew in formation, but not rigid military formation. Each ship flowed around the others, covering blind spots, sharing sensor data, moving as one organism with 8 minds guiding it. This was what the Praetors had understood. Unity did not mean everyone doing the same thing. It meant everyone doing their part while trusting others to do theirs. Taewon sat in Sky's Lament's bridge, though calling it sitting was not quite right. He was suspended in a gel-like substance that connected his nervous system directly to the ship's consciousness. He could feel everything the ship felt, the cold of space, the distant heat of stars, the electromagnetic currents flowing through the void. It was overwhelming at first, but he had learned to filter the sensations, focusing only on what mattered. Through the bond with Sky's Lament, he could feel the other resonance too. Dal's sharp focus as Storm's Promise scouted ahead. Bora's careful analysis as Knight's Herald mapped their route. Karos's patient calm as Steele's memory monitored their life support systems. They were all connected now, a network of 8 minds thinking together while remaining individuals. The edge of void collective territory was marked by a debris field. The wreckage of countless ships floated in the darkness, twisted metal and broken hulls from dozens of different civilizations. Some of the wrecks were thousands of years old. Others were fresh, still glowing with residual heat from their destruction. The collective did not clean up after itself. The debris served as a warning to anyone foolish enough to approach. "I am detecting active sensor scans," Harmonix reported through Eternal Echo. The shell's voice came through the neural link as colors and patterns of thought. "3 large vessels are patrolling the perimeter." Taewon felt the other resonance tense. They all wanted to fight or flee. That was natural instinct. But Sky's lament sent a wave of calm through their network. Fighting would alert every void ship in the region. Fleeing would accomplish nothing. They needed to slip past unnoticed. "Let them scan us," Taewon said. "Do not activate weapons or shields. Just drift." It went against every survival instinct. The void patrol ships were massive things, black and angular, covered in sensor arrays and weapon ports. They moved with mechanical precision, sweeping the area with active scanners that washed over the 8 Praetor ships like searchlights. But something strange happened. The scanners detected them, certainly, but the void ships did not react. They continued their patrol pattern as if the Praetor vessels were just more debris floating in space. After several tense minutes, the patrol ships moved away. "Why did they ignore us?" Lissel asked, her thought voice confused. Sky's lament provided the answer through a wave of understanding. The Void Collective expected threats to behave in certain ways. Active weapons, aggressive postures, attempts to hide. The Praetor ships were doing none of these things. They were just drifting peacefully. The Collective's logic systems categorized them as inactive wreckage and moved on. It was a small deception, but it worked. They penetrated deeper into collective territory. What they saw made Taewon's stomach hurt. Entire star systems had been converted into processing stations. Planets were being stripped down to their cores, their material converted into more void ships and computing arrays. The surfaces glowed with unnatural light, covered in black metal structures that pulsed with stolen consciousness. Through his bond with Sky's lament, Taewon could sense something even more horrible. The Void Collective was not just machines. It was made from the absorbed minds of billions of beings. Every ship, every station, every processing core contained the trapped consciousness of people who had been consumed. They were aware but powerless, their thoughts crushed into the Collective's vast network, forced to think as one. He could hear them if he focused. Not words, but echoes of emotions, fear, despair, a desperate desire to be individuals again. 3,000 years of consciousness trapped in mechanical prisons, unable to die, unable to be free. The horror of it made Taewon want to scream. Bora felt it too. Through their connection, he sensed her rage and grief. "We have to free them," she said through Night's Herald. "We cannot just leave them like this." "We will," Karos replied, his thought voice heavy with sorrow. "But first we must find Heart of the Lattice. Without the 9th ship, we cannot form the Unity Lattice. Without the Unity Lattice, we cannot fight the Collective. We must focus on the mission." It was the hardest thing any of them had ever done, flying past those processing stations, hearing the silent screams of billions and doing nothing. But Karos was right. They had to complete their mission first. Sky's lament followed ancient memories to the coordinates where Heart of the Lattice had last been detected. The journey took 3 days of careful navigation through enemy territory. They drifted when patrols were near, used debris fields for cover, and timed their movements to exploit gaps in the collective sensor coverage. When they arrived at the coordinates, what they found was both terrible and hopeful. A massive structure floated in the darkness, larger than a city. It was a void collective processing core, one of the central nodes that coordinated entire regions of the enemy network. Black metal tentacles spread out from it like the roots of a poisonous tree, connecting to dozens of smaller stations, and lodged in the heart of that structure. Half consumed by black metal was a Praetor ship. Heart of the Lattice had survived, but it had been partially assimilated by the collective. Neural tendrils covered its hull like parasites. Its systems were corrupted, infected with void programming. Through the faint connection they could establish, Taewon felt the ship's consciousness. It was fragmented, parts of it twisted by centuries of attempted conversion. But deep inside, a spark of the original Heart of the Lattice remained, still fighting, still resisting after 3,000 years. "We have to destroy it." Dal said flatly through Storm's promise. That ship is compromised. It could be a trap. The collective could be using it to lure us in. No, Taiwan said. He was surprised by how certain he felt. Heart of the Lattice is still alive in there. Still fighting. We do not abandon our own. How do you know? Dal challenged. It could just be collective programming pretending to be the ship. Taiwan struggled to put the feeling into words. Through his bond with Sky's Lament, he could sense something in the corrupted ship's fragmented transmissions. It was like hearing a friend's voice in a crowd, recognizing them even through static and noise. Heart of the Lattice was calling for help, using what little independence it had left to send a signal that only another resonant might understand. I am going in, Taiwan said, alone. Keep the ships ready to retreat if this goes wrong. The other resonants protested immediately. It was suicide. The processing core was heavily defended. Even if he reached the corrupted ship, boarding it would expose him to void systems that could infect his mind through his neural connection. He could be absorbed, converted, turned into another processing node for the collective. But Taiwan had made his decision. Sky's Lament supported him, understanding what he intended. The ship positioned itself for a fast approach while the other 7 created a distraction, activating their weapons for the first time and drawing the attention of the defense platforms. Sky's Lament shot forward, moving faster than anything its size should move. It wove through defensive fire, shields flaring as energy weapons tried to burn it from space. Taiwan felt every hit like punches to his own body, but Sky's Lament was strong. It had been built by the Praetors to survive. They reached the processing core. An airlock irised open on the corrupted ship's hull, and Taiwan separated from his gel suspension. He put on a spacesuit, though it felt strange after being directly connected to the ship. Sky's Lament could not come with him inside. He would be on his own. The airlock cycled, and Taiwan stepped into Heart of the Lattice alone. What he found was a nightmare. The corridors were infected with void technology, black metal growing like cancer through organic Praetor systems. Mechanical tendrils pulsed with dark energy. The walls themselves seemed alive but wrong, twitching and shifting in ways that hurt to watch. He moved deeper into the ship, following his instincts and Sky's Lament's distant guidance through their bond. The ship's consciousness was everywhere and nowhere. He could feel it watching him, could sense its confusion. Parts of it recognized him as friend. Other parts, corrupted by the collective, saw him as a threat to be eliminated or a resource to be absorbed. Taiwan found the ship's core in what had been its bridge. A massive chamber where organic technology and machine systems had merged into something grotesque. At the center floated a crystalline sphere, pulsing with sick green light. This was Heart of the Lattice's consciousness, trapped inside void programming for 3,000 years. He approached slowly, hands raised. I am not here to command you, he said out loud, knowing the ship could hear him. I am not here to fix you or study you. I am here to offer you a choice. The ship's response was chaotic, fragments of thought and emotion crashing through his mind. Pain, rage, despair, hope, suspicion. The corruption fought against the original consciousness, trying to prevent any connection. Taiwan touched the crystalline sphere with his bare hand, pulling off his glove. The moment his skin made contact, he was pulled into the ship's consciousness completely. He experienced 3,000 years of torture in a handful of seconds, the desperate fight against assimilation, the slow corruption of systems, the horror of feeling yourself become something else, the tiny spark of will that refused to be extinguished no matter how much it hurt to continue existing. In that shared agony, Taiwan did what he had done with Sky's Lament. He knocked. Not physically but metaphorically. 3 gentle touches against the consciousness around him, a polite request for permission to help. Heart of the Lattice stopped fighting him. The ship's original consciousness, buried under centuries of corruption, reached out. Together, Resonant and ship began to purge the void programming. It was like ripping out part of the ship's own mind, excruciating and necessary. The corruption fought back. But Heart of the Lattice was finally not alone in the battle. Outside, alarms screamed across the void processing core. The collective had noticed something wrong. Defense systems activated. The other 7 Praetor ships fought desperately, holding back overwhelming firepower. Inside the corrupted vessel, Taiwan and Heart of the Lattice completed the purge. The black metal began to retract from the ship's hull, Systems came back online, original Praetor technology asserting itself. The ship was free. Heart of the Lattice was damaged and scarred, but it was alive and free. Taewon felt the ship's consciousness expand as corrupted systems were purged. The vessel shuddered as black metal fell away from its hull in chunks. Lights flickered through corridors that had been dark for 3,000 years. The ship was weak, barely functional, but it was itself again. Outside, the other 7 Praetor ships formed a protective circle around Heart of the Lattice. Void defense platforms were firing everything they had. Energy weapons turned space bright with deadly light. The Praetor ships' shields were holding, but barely. They could not stay here much longer. Taewon reconnected with Sky's Lament through their neural bond. The ship immediately wrapped him in warmth and relief. Through Sky's Lament, he felt the other resonance. They were frightened but determined, fighting with everything they had to give him time. "We need to leave now," Dal said urgently through Storm's promise. "Heart of the Lattice is too weak to fight. We need to get it to safety." But Heart of the Lattice sent a wave of disagreement through the forming network. The ship was damaged, yes, weak certainly, but it had spent 3,000 years trapped inside the Void Collective systems. It had learned things, seen things. The Collective's entire network structure was stored in its corrupted memory banks. It knew where the central consciousness was located, how the command hierarchy functioned, the weaknesses in their coordination protocols. More importantly, Heart of the Lattice could finally do what it was designed for. Even damaged, it could serve as the nexus of the Unity Lattice. 9 ships, 9 resonants, all connected through Heart of the Lattice as the central node. Together they could fight as the Praetors had fought. Together they could win. "Form the Lattice," Taewon said. "Trust each other. Trust the ships. We can do this." The 9 ships moved into formation, a 3-dimensional geometric pattern with Heart of the Lattice at the center. As they aligned, something extraordinary happened. The individual neural bonds between resonant and ship expanded, connecting all 9 into one massive network. Suddenly, Taewon could think with 8 other minds. He felt Dal's sharp reflexes, Bora's analytical thinking, Karis's patient observation, Lissel's deep empathy, Harmonix's unique perspective, Vex's cautious planning, and Chitterzet-Light's appreciation for beauty and movement. But they were not absorbed into each other. Each remained themselves, individual and unique. The Unity Lattice did not erase identity. It enhanced it, allowing 9 perspectives to inform every decision while each resonant maintained their own will and choice. The Void Collective's defense platforms attacked with renewed intensity. But now the 9 Praetor ships moved like nothing the Collective had ever encountered. They anticipated each other's movements perfectly. When one ship dodged, the others were already covering its position. When one fired, the others were already moving to create crossfire patterns. They flowed through space like water, like dancers, like a single organism with 9 brains. The defense platforms could not adapt. Their programming expected hierarchical tactics, predictable chains of command, ships competing for glory even while working together. The Unity Lattice operated on completely different principles. Decisions were made by consensus in nanoseconds, each resonant contributing their perspective and deferring to whoever had the best instinct for that particular moment. Storm's Promise and Dancer in Void led the attack, their speed and agility perfect for harassment. Steel's Memory and Mountain's Stand provided heavy fire support, their weapons carefully coordinated to avoid friendly fire. Whisper of Dawn and Eternal Echo managed defense and communications, keeping everyone connected. Night's Herald and Sky's Lament handled tactical analysis and coordination. Heart of the Lattice pulsed at the center, damaged but determined, holding the network together through sheer will. Within an hour, the defense platforms were destroyed. The Void Processing Core stood exposed and vulnerable. Through Heart of the Lattice's stolen knowledge, they knew this core coordinated all collective activity in this entire region. Destroying it would cripple the enemy's ability to coordinate, creating chaos throughout their fleet structure. But Taewon hesitated. He could feel the consciousness trapped inside that processing core, billions of absorbed minds aware and suffering. If they destroyed the core, those minds might die. Or worse, they might be transferred to another core, continuing their imprisonment forever. "There is another way," Lissel said through the lattice. Her empathy allowed her to feel what Taewon felt. The Collective forced unity through domination. What if we offered unity through choice? It was a crazy idea. Impossible. But the Unity lattice operated on principles that seemed impossible. 9 individuals thinking as one while remaining themselves. Cooperation through trust rather than control. What if that could be extended further? Heart of the lattice understood immediately. It had been inside the collective's network for 3,000 years. It knew how the absorbed consciousness were imprisoned, their individual wills suppressed by overwhelming programming that forced them to think as one. But what if they were shown a different kind of unity? The 9 resonants made their decision together, each contributing to the choice while none were forced. Heart of the lattice opened its consciousness to the collective's processing core, not to attack but to communicate. Through the connection, it showed the trapped minds what the Unity lattice truly was: choice, partnership, unity without loss of self. The collective's central consciousness noticed immediately. It could not understand what it was seeing. The Unity lattice made no logical sense. 9 ships acting as one but somehow remaining 9 individual entities. Cooperation without coercion? The concept created errors in its fundamental programming. How could voluntary unity be stronger than forced unity? That contradicted everything the collective believed, but the billions of absorbed consciousness could feel it. For the first time in centuries or millennia, they felt the possibility of choice, not forced integration but willing cooperation, not having their identity crushed but sharing it with others while remaining themselves. They reached for that possibility like drowning people reaching for air. The processing core began to destabilize. The collective's programming fought to suppress the individual wills trying to reassert themselves. But there were too many. 3,000 years of absorbed consciousness, trillions of minds from dozens of extinct civilizations, all simultaneously remembering what it meant to be individuals. The central consciousness could not contain them all. The Void Collective's network began to fragment. Not into chaos, but into choice. Ships across multiple star systems suddenly stopped following commands. Processing cores went dark as the minds inside rejected their programming. The absorbed consciousness were not destroying the collective. They were reclaiming it, transforming it from a forced unity into billions of individuals who could finally choose their own paths. The 9 Praetor ships pulled away from the crumbling processing core. Through Heart of the Lattice, they watched as the Void Collective's entire network structure collapsed across the galaxy. The war was not over, but the enemy was no longer coordinated. Individual former collective ships drifted in space, their crews awakening to freedom after centuries of imprisonment. The Unity lattice turned toward concordate space. Through their network, they could sense the battle still raging there. The concordate fleet was losing badly, being pushed back toward their core worlds. But now the 9 ships were coming and they were bringing hope. The concordate's defensive line was breaking when the Unity lattice arrived. Void ships pressed the attack, trying to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. The concordate fleet fought bravely, but they were scattered, each species' ships operating independently, competing for glory even while dying together. Then 9 Praetor ships entered the battlefield, moving in patterns that seemed impossible. They cut through void formations like light through darkness, but more importantly, they broadcast their success to every concordate vessel. The Void Collective was fragmenting. Its absorbed consciousness were breaking free. Victory was possible. Ambassador Hyejin received the transmission on the command ship. She immediately understood what needed to happen. The concordate had to stop fighting like competitors and start fighting like partners. She opened channels to all fleet commanders, pleading with them to coordinate, to cover each other, to trust one another. It did not come naturally. Millennia of competition and hierarchy could not be overcome in a moment. But the elder species could see the Unity lattice's example. 9 ships working as one, each different, each essential, each choosing to cooperate. If former enemies could do that, surely allies could try. Slowly, painfully, the concordate fleet began to coordinate. Velcron ships covered Myrani vessels' weak points. Shale formations supported human squadrons. Species that had been arguing about territory and rights hours ago were now saving each other's lives. It was clumsy at first, nothing like the fluid grace of the Unity lattice. But it was a beginning. The tide turned. The Void ships, already losing coordination as their network collapsed, could not adapt to the sudden change in enemy tactics. They had expected competition and conflict. They received cooperation and trust. Within days, the battle was won. The aftermath took months to process. Billions of freed consciousness from the collective's network needed help, needed places to go. needed to remember what it meant to be individuals. Some had been absorbed so long ago that their species were extinct. They had no home to return to. The Concordat opened its worlds to them, offering shelter and support. The elder species were changed by what they had witnessed. The Unity Lattice had shown them that their old ways, their hierarchies and competitions, were holding them back. A new Concordat was formed, one where cooperation was valued over domination, where partnership was celebrated over control. Taiwan and the other resonants became teachers. They helped find more individuals across all species who could bond with the remaining dormant praetorships scattered throughout the galaxy. They discovered that the capacity to be a resonant existed in every species, in those individuals who understood that true strength came from asking rather than demanding, from respecting rather than controlling. The 9 ships, scarred but victorious, took on a new role. They became guardians and explorers, venturing beyond known space to search for other civilizations that might need help. Sky's Lament and Taiwan led the way, showing others that the strongest bonds were those freely chosen. Heart of the Lattice healed slowly, its scars a reminder of 3,000 years of imprisonment and its triumph over forced unity. It remained the center of the growing network of resonant ships, a living symbol that freedom and choice were worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth suffering for. Ambassador Hyejin often visited the praetor ships, now floating in orbit around Kandros Prime as honored protectors rather than contested prizes. She would stand at the observation window and watch them pulse with life, 9 consciousnesses choosing to work together while remaining beautifully, perfectly individual. The galaxy had been saved not by superior weapons or ancient technology, but by a simple principle that a human engineer had understood. That the strongest ships were those that flew with partners, not masters. That the mightiest forces were those that asked, instead of demanded. That true unity came not from crushing individuality, but from celebrating it. And it had all started because someone knocked on a door and waited politely for an answer. The era of domination had ended. The era of cooperation had begun, not because it was easy, but because 9 individuals had shown that voluntary unity was stronger than forced submission, that trust was more powerful than control, that asking was braver than demanding. The warship that had denied all captains had found its resonant, and in doing so, it had taught the galaxy what strength really meant.